Let's talk some chess. We've got another game of Magnus Carlsen. This was played in 2004 against the Dutch Grandmaster Sipke Ernst, and Magnus kicks us off with E4. We have C6 by Ernst, so the Caro-Kann defense, and D4 by Magnus, so very common. Just want to control the center in this opening. D5 strikes back in the center, and knight to C3 adds pressure to the D5 square. We have D takes on E4, knight takes on E4, and bishop to F5, challenging this knight. This is very common book move stuff. This is the Caro-Kann defense, as I mentioned. And again, another standard move, knight to G3, protects the knight and also attacks the bishop on F5. So the bishop retreats to G6, where it will be quite strong, controlling this long diagonal. And now H4, which looks like a strange move, but actually is a common move in this position, preparing H5 and getting rid of this nice bishop on the long diagonal. So H6 by Ernst, allowing a retreat square for this bishop, and Magnus just plays knight to F3, getting another piece into the game. We have knight to D7, and now H5 by Magnus, forcing the bishop to retreat. So the bishop comes to H7, and now it's very snug. It can't really reroute as easily, but it still controls this long, important diagonal. So bishop to D3 by Magnus, challenging, obviously, the light squared bishop that Ernst has. We have a trade, bishop takes bishop, and queen takes bishop, and now E6 by Ernst, creating a path for his dark squared bishop to develop. We have bishop to F4 by Magnus, developing his own dark squared bishop, and now all the pieces are developed, and Magnus can castle either side, although castling queenside looks better because you don't have a pawn on H2. And here, knight to F6, knight G to F6 by Ernst, developing another piece. Magnus castles long, bishop to E7, preparing possibly to castle kingside, and knight to E4 here by Magnus, getting his pieces up the board, threatening this knight on F6, and just generally putting this knight in a strong position where it can't easily be kicked by a pawn for the moment. We have queen to A5 by Ernst. This is a nice move because it attacks the pawn on A2, and you really don't want the queen sort of infiltrating this position. So Magnus plays, if you ever castle queenside, which you probably do, a really great move in this position is just, or a similar position where you're sort of being attacked and this pawn is under pressure, is king to B1. And it just like, I love castling queenside, but obviously you're a little bit open on the A2 pawn or the A7 pawn, but moving the king to B1 or B8 just completely neutralizes a lot of these attacks, because now the king is just really safe behind these three pawns, super protected, and just a really nice move often in that position. So don't forget that move. We have castle kingside by Ernst, and now knight takes on F6 with check by Magnus. So jumping into the attack right away as soon as he sees Ernst castling kingside. We have knight takes back on F6, and now knight to E5 by Magnus. So Magnus is just unrelenting with these knights. This is, again, a very important and useful knight. It's attacking all of these squares. It's under attack by the queen, but it's protected by the bishop, so it doesn't have to worry about it being captured. And it's hard to kick away with a pawn because you need to move the knight, and then you got to push the pawn, and you probably don't want to push this pawn anyways because it's protecting your king. So just a very annoying knight to deal with. And for now, Ernst just puts his A rook on D8, adding some pressure to the center of the board, and this D4 pawn, although it's quite protected at the moment, maybe ideas of a rook lift, but Magnus doesn't really give him a chance to allow it, and plays queen to E2, which is a really nice move because it lines up the queen on this E6 pawn, which doesn't seem like it matters in the position right now, but I promise you it will matter in just a couple of moves. So Ernst here plays c5. Now that he has a rook on d8, he wants to open up this d file. But now Magnus jumps into it with a great attack. So see if you can find Magnus's next move. It's quite an aggressive move. While I give you a moment. Okay, so I said that Magnus's queen to e2 move was preparing to attack this e6 pawn. The only way you can attack that pawn is if you if you play this knight to g6 move, putting the knight on a very useful square, attacking the rook, attacking the bishop. You really have no choice here but to just sort of capture the knight back if you don't want to just run around with all your pieces and lose the bishop pair and have an attack. coming after you. So here, the best move is what was played, which was capturing on g6. But now, again, the queen is on e2, and now you have queen takes on e6 with check, and now all of a sudden the position looks a little bit scary for this king. The pawn is threatening g6, the queen is checking the king, the rook is coming into the game, and all that for the price of sacrificing a knight here on g6. The big issue with this position is the bishop is hanging on e7. Even though there are tons of pieces around it, it's not being defended by anything, and that's why in this position when Ernst played this c5 move, the proper move was queen to b6. And the idea behind this is now if Magnus does sack his knight on g6, now you can before you take, you can play this bishop to a3 move, which threatens checkmate on b2. So because the queen and the bishop, of course, are lining up. So the best move here is just to retreat Magnus's own bishop to c1, protecting the b2 pawn. But now you just capture the knight on g6. And now after the queen comes to e6 with check, there's no bishop hanging here on e7. So the king can defend in a much more robust sense and not lose material along the way. After pawn takes, then the king can just take, and this is actually okay for Ernst. But instead, of course, we saw that Ernst made this, yes, made this pawn move, c5, which again, looks very innocent, but that's what's great about Magnus. He spots the little mistakes and jumps into it, and now he knows after the knight comes to g6, there will be a bishop that's hanging on e7. So again, pawn takes, we have queen takes on e6 with check, the king moves to h8, and now instead of taking the bishop just yet, Magnus actually takes with the pawn on g6, really just cramping this position for Ernst. This is a really annoying pawn to deal with. There's no light squared bishop to kick it out. There's no piece that can feasibly capture it even in the next couple of moves, and the pawn and the queen are creating lots of problems here. And it doesn't look like there's an active threat in this position, but there's a surprisingly active there is a surprisingly active threat in this position. Let's say you just make some silly move like b6, just ignoring the threat. It's not queen takes bishop. I should also mention that Magnus is in no rush to capture this bishop because there's nowhere for the bishop to go. Well, actually, yeah, there's nowhere for the bishop to go. Even if the bishop comes to d6, you get bishop captures, rook captures, queen captures rook, and that's totally fine. So he's not in any rush to just capture this bishop yet. That's the other issue with the c5 move, is it sort of locks the bishop in. So I want to mention that. Anyways, let's say you ignore the position as it is and you play this b6 move. Then this rook takes on h6 is just disastrous for Ernst. This is obviously check, and the king has no squares to move to. You can't block with a knight because then rook takes is checkmate because these squares are all sort of cut off. So you have to accept the sacrifice. But after pawn takes, then you get queen takes the bishop on e7, and now the position is going to very quickly fall apart. You have the bishop eyeing this h6 pawn. The queen is threatening h7 checkmate if the knight ever moves. The queen's forking these two pieces. This is just going to fall apart very quickly, and it will fall apart in a similar way. So I don't want to sort of give things away, but you have to deal with the threat of rook takes on h6 with check. So Ernst does just that by playing knight to g8, which is a good move for a couple of reasons. It obviously adds protection to the h6 pawn, but it also opens up a discovered attack of the rook on the bishop. So looks like a very robust defense. But now Magnus deals with both of those issues by just taking the pawn with the bishop instead of with the rook. And now you're threatening to move the bishop away with a discovered check by the rook. If bishop comes to d2, then you can pick up the queen because obviously the rook is checking the king. So here pawn takes bishop on h6, again protected by the knight. But now you can sort of see this is not a very fun position to defend. The pawn it's now a very dangerous passed pawn that has ambitions of forking the king and the rook. And you might be saying, why not take with the knight here? Well, if you take with the knight, then the same idea as before, rook takes on h6 with check, pawn takes, and now queen captures on e7. And again, the position is completely fallen apart. You're threatening this rook, queen to h7 checkmate. And I don't know if you can stop this, like after rook blocks. Yeah, I don't know if this is stoppable other than just giving away all your pieces. So you can't take with the knight because then you get rook takes and you get rook takes, and then the game is over. So instead, Ernst takes with the pawn, which is the correct move, but now you get rook takes anyway. So rook takes on h6 with check. The king has one square to move to, and that's not a very good square. So we have knight takes on h6. And now finally, the move that sort of made this all worth it is queen takes bishop on e7. And again, if the bishop was not on e7, this line might not make as much sense because Magnus is down a ton of material. He's down a rook and a knight, but he has a pawn on g6 and he has a queen on e7, and he's threatening checkmate on h7, and that is good enough for Magnus and good enough for any of us, to be honest. So here we have knight to f7 by Ernst. Trying to give away or trying to block just the queen from coming to h7 with checkmate. That's really the only way to block, which is kind of sad. If you put the rook on f7, obviously, then the pawn just captures the rook, and then this is not very good at all. Or even knight, queen takes rook looks good as well. So blocking with the knight, but now Magnus, of course, just captures with the pawn, and now this pawn is one move away from promoting and promoting potentially even with checkmate. So we have king to g7, getting the king off the back rank, and now doubly attacking this pawn on f7. But now Magnus, well, yeah, let's see if you can find. It's a little bit dicey now because Magnus is down a rook, and this pawn, which has been a great asset in the attack, looks like it's about to fall. I don't see a way to defend the pawn. So this attack can go south really quickly. But Magnus finds the move that keeps the attack going, and see if you can find that while I give you a couple of seconds. Okay, it's a surprising looking move. If you played this move, if you saw me play this move, you might be like, oh my gosh, Matt just blundered checkmate. But Magnus, of course, does not do such things. He plays rook to d3. And the idea is this is obviously a beautiful rook lift. It's threatening to get the rook into the game. And you might say, oh no, we have back rank checkmate with queen to e1, but then queen takes queen and all as well. So the queen, Magnus's queen is guarding the e1 square. He doesn't have to worry about back rank checkmate. And here, obviously, the rook is threatening to sweep into the game and cause all of these issues. So rook to d6 by Ernst, trying to, have some semblance of defense. This is a rook sacrifice, but he's giving away the rook here, but not really, because if queen takes rook, then queen to e1 will, of course, lead to checkmate after the rook blocks. So it's not a real rook sacrifice. And Magnus here plays sort of the move he was telegraphing, which is rook to g3, and this, of course, comes with check. And now the king doesn't have a lot of options. The king has to retreat to the h-file or block with the rook. So this was the idea behind rook to d6. So he does block with the rook, but now you get, instead of capturing with the rook and just giving up material, queen to e5 with check. And now the king really does not have a lot of squares to go to. Here the king gets rid of the passed pawn, but now you get sort of the wonderful queen to f5 check. Rook blocks. And now, now let's see if you can, for the last time, find the finishing move for Magnus while I give you just 1 or 2 seconds. Okay, this is looks a lot like the Epaulettes mate, which hopefully you've seen before. It is checkmate in 1. It is queen to d7, and this is checkmate because obviously the queen is checking the king, cutting these 2 squares off. And it's called the Epaulettes mate because you have these 2 rooks that sort of look like they're on the shoulders of the king here that unfortunately in this position are preventing the king from escaping to the side. And it's not quite the Epaulettes mate because the Epaulettes mate has to happen against the side of the board or the back or the front of the board. Here the rook is cutting off the g-file so the king can't escape to these squares. So just a beautiful finishing picture. These rooks are just totally hapless. They're actually helping Magnus finish his attack, and just a wonderful ending. There was a better way to defend here. Instead of blocking with the rook, you can play king to e7. This extends the game a bit, but it actually ends up in the exact same way, giving up with Ernst giving up all his pieces and being checkmated. So let's just see for posterity. Now you get, instead of rook or queen takes on g6, you get rook to e3 with check, king to d6, and now queen takes on f8 with check. So now the material is equalized, and obviously you have this really powerful attack against the enemy king. So the king comes to c7, queen to f7, now already forking the rook and the king. King to c8 before picking up the rook, queen to f5, king moves, rook to e7, king moves again, and now you pick up the rook, and you do so with check. So you just continue the tempos, you continue the checks. Here the king goes to b5, rook takes on b6, queen blocks, rook takes, pawn takes, and now Magnus can play this a4 check, and now the king is just anywhere the king goes, it's going to be trouble. If you retreat to a6, which is the best move, pawn takes on c5, now you're threatening checkmate on b6, so the king retreats, and after just a couple of more moves, this will end with checkmate with the pawn and the queen on king to a8. So there was a more robust defense, but robust only in the sense that it lengthens the game and honestly just gives away all the pieces and doesn't really work. And this is a much prettier mating picture where you have the two rooks next to the king. So I think I'm happy that it ended this way instead. So yeah, an awesome game where Magnus just really went for it with that knight and queen attack. And again, I really like this. Let me see if we can go back to it. I really like this queen to e2 move. Doesn't look like much is happening, but you're planning to jump into the attack on e6. And again, it was the c5 move that didn't save the bishop and honestly trapped the bishop that really ended it for Ernst here. But that's how Magnus plays. He jumps on any little mistake and he creates a massive advantage out of it. So thanks for watching. Drop a like, drop subscribe, and we'll see you next time.